Listen closely, because what I'm about to share is not something you'll hear in crowded rooms or casual conversations. It's a truth most men live their entire lives without ever understanding, and the moment a man finally sees it clearly, everything changes. His confidence, his relationships, and the way the world responds to him. There's a quiet frustration many men carry. You see it in their eyes, even when they smile. They work hard, they try to be kind, they do everything they believe is right, yet something still feels missing. They give their time, their energy, their attention, and in return, they often feel overlooked, misunderstood, or taken for granted. And then they ask themselves, what am I doing wrong? But here's the truth, it's not always about what you're doing. It's about what you don't understand yet, because most men are taught from a young age to chase approval, to be liked, to prove their worth through effort, through sacrifice, through constantly trying to win someone over. They believe that if they give more, try harder, and become everything someone else wants, then they will finally be valued. But life doesn't work that way. There was once a man, let's call him Armin. He was everything society tells you to be. Responsible, respectful, always available. He listened, he cared, he gave his time freely. When a woman needed him, he was there. When she pulled away, he tried harder. When she became distant, he became more attentive. And slowly, without even realizing it, he lost himself. Not because he was weak, but because he never learned the one truth that changes everything. The truth is this: people don't value what is always available without effort. Let that sink in. It's not cruelty, it's not manipulation, it's human nature. When something is constantly within reach, constantly giving, constantly adjusting itself to fit someone else's needs, it stops being seen as valuable. Not because it lacks worth, but because it never demands to be respected. Armin didn't understand this. He thought love meant giving endlessly. He thought being good meant sacrificing his boundaries. He believed that if he showed enough care, enough patience, enough loyalty, eventually he would be chosen. But instead, he was overlooked, and this is where most men get it wrong. They think the solution is to become colder, harsher, distant. They think they must stop caring altogether, but that's not the answer either. The real shift, the real awakening, is much deeper than that. It's the moment a man realizes that his value does not come from how much he gives, but from how strongly he stands in who he is. You see, confidence isn't loud, it doesn't beg, it doesn't chase, it doesn't try to convince anyone to stay. Confidence simply is, and when a man reaches that place, when he stops seeking validation and starts living with self-respect, everything around him begins to change. The way he speaks changes, the way he walks changes, the way people respond to him changes, and suddenly the same attention he once chased begins to come to him naturally, not because he became someone else, but because he finally stopped abandoning himself. This is the truth most men never learned, and the few who do never go back to who they used to be. Because once you understand your worth, you stop negotiating it, and when that happens, the dynamic shifts completely. Not through force, not through games, but through presence. A man who respects himself doesn't need to control anyone. He doesn't need to prove anything. He doesn't need to chase attention, because his energy speaks before he even says a word. In that energy is what people respond to. That is what draws respect. That is what creates attraction. And that is what most men spend years trying to figure out without ever realizing it was never about others to begin with. It was always about them. Something shifted in Armin the day he finally grew tired, not of people, not of women, but of the version of himself that kept bending, shrinking, and waiting to be chosen. It didn't happen overnight. There was no dramatic moment, no sudden breakthrough. Just a quiet realization that kept repeating in his mind, if I keep living like this, I will lose myself completely. And for the first time in his life, he stopped asking, how do I make her stay? and started asking, "Why am I afraid to walk away?" That question changed everything, because most men are not afraid of losing someone, they are afraid of facing themselves without distraction. They are afraid of the silence that comes when there is no one to impress, no one to chase, no one to validate their existence. But that silence, that uncomfortable space, is where transformation begins. Armin began to pull his energy back. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in awareness. He started noticing how often he said yes when he meant no, how often he gave his time when he was already exhausted, how often he ignored his own needs just to keep someone else comfortable. And slowly, he started choosing differently. At first, it felt strange, almost wrong, like he was becoming selfish, but in reality, he was doing something he had never done before. He was respecting himself. He stopped over-explaining. He stopped chasing conversations that were clearly fading. He stopped trying to fix situations that were never his responsibility to fix. And something unexpected happened. The same people who once ignored him began to notice him, not because he played games, not because he became distant for attention, but because he was no longer easy to overlook. You see, when a man is always available, always predictable, always trying to please, he becomes background noise. But when he becomes grounded, when he becomes intentional with his time and energy, his presence starts to carry weight. And people feel that. Armin didn't become louder, he became clearer. He didn't become colder, he became more selective. He didn't stop caring, he simply stopped overgiving where it wasn't valued. This is the part most men struggle to understand. They think attraction is about what you say, how you look, or how much you can offer. But real attraction, real respect begins with boundaries. Not walls that shut people out, but standards that define what you accept and what you don't. Because when you have no boundaries, you teach others how to treat you. And when you finally create them, you teach them something new. Some people will step back, some will disappear. And that's where many men panic. They think, "I've lost them." But what they don't realize is they were never truly there to begin with. Because anyone who only values you when you are overgiving was never valuing you, they were benefiting from you. And this is the truth that sets a man free. Not everyone is meant to stay. Not everyone deserves access to your time, your attention, your energy. And the moment you truly accept that, you stop trying to hold on to people who are not aligned with you. Armin began to notice something deeper. The more he respected his own time, the more others did too. The more he spoke with intention, the more people listened. The less he chased, the more things naturally came toward him. It felt almost unreal at first, but it wasn't magic, it was alignment. For the first time in his life, his actions matched his worth. And that is powerful. Because when a man is aligned like that, he doesn't need to convince anyone of anything. He doesn't need to prove his value, he becomes it. And that's when everything starts to shift, not just in relationships, but in life. Opportunities appear, conversations change, the energy around him transforms, because he is no longer operating from lack, he is operating from certainty. Uncertainty is rare, that's why it stands out, that's why it attracts, and that's why once a man reaches this level of awareness, he is never treated the same way again. Not because he demands it, but because he embodies it. And this is where the transformation becomes undeniable, not just to Armin, but to everyone around him. Because when a man truly steps into his self-respect, it doesn't just change how others see him, it changes what he is willing to accept. Before, Armin would tolerate confusion, mixed signals, uncertainty. He would stay in situations that drained him, hoping they would eventually become something meaningful. He believed patience would turn inconsistency into commitment, but now he saw things clearly. Clarity replaces confusion when a man knows his worth. He began to notice the small things he once ignored, the delayed replies that carried no effort, the conversations that felt one-sided, the moments where he felt like an option instead of a priority, and instead of overthinking, he simply observed. And then he chose, not with emotion, but with awareness. Because the truth is, once a man learns this truth, he no longer reacts impulsively. He doesn't chase temporary validation. He doesn't try to decode every signal. He understands something far more powerful. Consistency reveals everything. Someone who values you will not leave you guessing. Someone who respects you will not make you question your place. And someone who truly wants you will not require you to prove your worth over and over again. This is where many men make their biggest mistake. They ignore reality and hold on to potential. They fall in love with what something could be instead of seeing what it actually is. Armin used to do the same, but not anymore. Now he trusted actions more than words. He paid attention to energy more than promises. And most importantly, he trusted himself. That trust changed everything. Because when a man trusts himself, he stops seeking reassurance from others. He doesn't need constant validation. He doesn't need approval to make decisions. He doesn't need someone else to define his value. And that kind of independence is powerful, not because it pushes people away, but because it filters the right people in. You see, when a man operates from neediness, he attracts situations that mirror that need. But when he operates from wholeness, he attracts something completely different. He attracts respect. He attracts genuine interest. He attracts people who meet him at his level, not those who take advantage of his willingness to give endlessly. And here's the part that most men never expect: the same energy they once chased starts chasing them. Not because they changed their appearance, not because they learned some trick or strategy, but because they changed their standard. They stopped accepting less than what they deserve. They stopped entertaining what feels wrong. They stopped staying where they are not valued. In that shift, that internal decision creates an external response. People feel it, they sense it, and they react to it. Armin began to experience this in ways he never imagined. Conversations felt easier, connections felt more genuine, and the constant pressure he once felt disappeared. For the first time, he wasn't trying to be enough. He simply was. And that's when he understood something deeper. It was never about winning anyone. It was about not losing himself. Because once a man loses himself in the pursuit of others, he loses the very thing that makes him valuable. But when he holds on to who he is, and when he protects his time, his energy, his peace, he becomes someone people naturally respect. Not out of fear, not out of control, but out of recognition of a man who knows his worth. And once that recognition is there, everything changes, because now he is no longer reacting to life. He is choosing it, and by the time Armin reached this staging, there was no going back. Not because he had become perfect, but because he had become aware. And awareness, once gained, cannot be unseen. He started to notice something that most men never fully understand. The game was never outside of him. It was never about trying to figure out others, trying to impress, trying to win. It was always about mastering himself. His thoughts, his reactions, his standards, because the moment a man stops reacting emotionally to everything around him, he gains control over his life in a way that feels almost unreal. Before a delayed message could ruin his entire mood, a change in tone could make him overthink for hours. A moment of distance could send him into a spiral of doubt, but now he was calm, not because he didn't care, but because he no longer depended on external things to feel stable. In that stability, that emotional control became his greatest strength, because when a man is emotionally grounded, he becomes unpredictable in the most powerful way. He is no longer easily shaken. He is no longer easily manipulated. He is no longer easily pulled into situations that drain him. He chooses when to engage. He chooses when to step back. He chooses what deserves his energy and what doesn't. And that level of control is rare. That's why it stands out. That's why it changes everything. Armin also realized something else, something even deeper. Not everyone will understand this version of you. Some people will call you distant. Others will say you've changed. Some may even try to pull you back into who you used to be, because that version of you was easier to control, easier to predict, easier to benefit from. But growth always comes with separation. You cannot evolve and remain the same person for everyone. And that's okay, because the right people, the ones who truly value you, will not be threatened by your growth. They will respect it, they will match it, they will appreciate the clarity, the strength, the peace that you bring into every interaction. And for the first time, relationships stop feeling like effort. They start feeling like alignment, no chasing, no confusion, no constant questioning, just mutual respect and natural connection. And that is where the real power lies. Not in control over others, but in control over yourself. Because once a man reaches this point, he is no longer seeking attention. He is no longer trying to be chosen. He becomes the one who chooses, and that shift is everything. Because when you become the one who chooses, you stop settling. You stop tolerating less than what you deserve. You stop investing in situations that drain you. And you start building a life that actually reflects your worth. This is the truth most men spend years chasing without ever finding. Not because it's hidden, but because it requires something most people avoid. Responsibility, responsibility for your standards, responsibility for your choices, responsibility for the way you allow others to treat you. And once you accept that responsibility, you take your power back fully. And when that happens, nothing and no one can take it away from you again. There comes a moment in a man's life, quiet, almost invisible, when everything he once believed begins to fall away. Not because the world changed, but because he did. And in that moment, he finally understands. He understands that chasing never created value, it only revealed his fear of being alone. He understands that overgiving never created love, it only taught others to expect more while offering less. He understands that losing himself was never the price of connection, it was the reason he kept feeling empty. And with that understanding comes a choice to stop abandoning himself, a choice to stand firm in who he is, even if it means walking alone for a while, a choice to protect his time, his energy, his peace, not out of ego, but out of self-respect. Because the truth is, once a man truly sees his worth, he can never unsee it. He no longer begs for attention. He no longer tries to convince anyone to stay. He no longer shrinks himself to fit into spaces where he is not valued. Instead, he becomes grounded. He becomes clear. He becomes the kind of man who doesn't need to speak loudly to be heard because his presence says everything. And this is where the real transformation happens, not in how many people want him, but in what he is willing to accept. Because now he chooses differently. He chooses peace over chaos. He chooses respect over attention. He chooses alignment over attachment. And in doing so, he creates a life that no longer feels like a constant struggle for validation, but a reflection of his inner strength. This is the truth, not that all women are finished, but that the version of a man who once felt lost, overlooked, and uncertain is finished. Gone, replaced by someone who understands that real power was never about controlling others. It was always about mastering himself. And once a man reaches that level, he doesn't chase, he doesn't compete, he doesn't fear loss, because he knows anything meant for him will meet him at his level. And anything that doesn't was never meant to stay. So if you're listening to this and something inside you feels different right now, hold on to that. Because that feeling is awareness, and awareness is where everything begins, not tomorrow, not someday, but now.